I'm Brandon Staglin, and this is One Mind Brainwaves. Naming something demystifies it. Naming a thought or a feeling can actually reduce its power over us, and naming a mental health condition can help us start to understand and treat it better for people who struggle with these conditions. But the labels we use casually, like normal or crazy, things we talk about when you talk about mental health very casually, can actually serve to increase stigma and shame that people experience. I've experienced this myself. I live with schizophrenia, and I've experienced stigma that has stopped me from taking opportunities that could have made a profound difference in my life. It's personal to me as well, as it is to so many people. In the culture surrounding mental health, how much does vocabulary and the words we use matter? Today, we'll be joined by a global anthropologist whose studies around the world have revealed a powerful perspective, which she'll share with us today, as well as a talented activist whose passion and creativity for her work is inspired by her lived experience. Later in the program, our team at One Mind Cyber Guide will share with us their review of their mental health app pick of the week. But first, we're excited to have with us today two very special guests. We're going to talk with us about how we talk about mental health in our society and the words we use. Dr. Richard Grinker, professor of anthropology at George Washington University, and author of Nobody's Normal, How Culture Created the Stigma of Mental Illness. And Michelle Hammer, schizophrenia activist, artist, designer, and founder of the Schizophrenic.NYC mental health clothing brand. Richard, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us on Brainwaves today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. It's great to see you both. And viewers, thank you too. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, anytime you feel like posting on our webcast, please post those in the comment section at any time. And if you know somebody who might benefit from what we're sharing today, please share this webcast with them too. Thanks. So, Richard, let's jump right into it. I've got a good question for you to get us started. So you've studied populations all over the globe and how they refer to and discuss brain conditions like autism and schizophrenia, for example, and how that both reflects and affects the perceptions of neurodiversity, which is essentially the perception that people, regardless or in fact because of brain differences, have unique strengths and value as individuals. Is it primarily language, or is it the wider culture that matters more to how we perceive and how we look at mental health?
Well, that's a great question. Language and culture both matter. Language is an essential part of culture. If we think of culture as the way in which human beings give meaning to ideas and behaviors, how human beings give meaning to what occurs in the natural world, well, we have to communicate about that. And we have to communicate about it both through our words and through our practices. Unfortunately, a lot of language involves understanding by comparison. So we know up by down, or hot by cold. And when those comparisons happen, we can see some negative things happening. And so one of the oppositions that's been created over the course of the past few hundred years is this opposition between the abnormal and the normal. But what I'm really trying to get at in the book, Nobody's Normal, that I've just published, is that how we provide a value to any of these terms is something that is up to us, that we create. There's nothing in nature that says this is good or this is bad. Take something like homosexuality, which in the middle of the 20th century was classified as a mental illness by the American Psychiatric Association. Well, today it's not classified as a mental illness. Moreover, we've established many, many more points in between these, this dichotomy of gay and straight. And not because anybody in science, in some lab, in some university, discovered something new about homosexuality. It wasn't science that changed things. It was culture that changed it.
Fantastic. And that brings to mind that it's possible to change the culture using things like speaking out about our mental health conditions, things we experience, getting to know people with mental health conditions. And we've seen progress happen in recent years, especially the last couple of years with the pandemic, making things more open about mental health and more people speaking out. we've had other guests on the show have commented on how actually harmful it can be when people casually joke about being so OCD, or our world today is so bipolar. And in most cases, the harm is probably unintentional, but making light of serious mental health conditions can have consequences. So this can add to the stigma that often is experienced by people with these conditions, right? And may prevent them from seeking help, which is so important for people's long-term well-being. Now, let's talk about the word stigma itself. What is stigma, and what does it mean in the context of mental health and identity?
Well, stigma is the shame, the secrecy, the moral judgment that is imposed on people who differ from a society's ideal. And that can also be internalized by people so that they stigmatize themselves. You don't even need society to do it. You do it all by yourself. But here in this notion of stigma is where I actually would differ with the perspective that you just introduced about the colloquial use of terms like OCD or autistic. The idea of a spectrum, that we all exist on different spectrums, is one that is an invitation to join all human beings in a common community. And so when I hear somebody say that they're a neat freak and they're a little OCD, I really don't believe that they think that they necessarily would meet the criteria in the DSM for OCD. When someone says they're a little autistic, I don't think they're unaware that autism can involve very serious suffering. But I think that what they're doing is disarming the power of those words to hurt, the power of those words to marginalize and to make people feel bad. So, I think that what we need to do is understand that language has great power. And as long as we have these terms that are becoming more open and becoming more discussed, then I think we're more likely to decrease stigma. By the same token, we should understand whether the terms that the experts use are damaging. And one example I give in the book is where the word for schizophrenia in Japan was incredibly terrifying. I mean, it literally meant, a mind torn asunder. And the Japanese medical establishment decided to come up with a new word that wasn't frightening. And the result of that was that schizophrenia became more treated, more talked about, something that was less shameful, something that, where a term is beneficial, a diagnostic term, if it actually drives some kind of treatment. And it's not beneficial if it keeps people away.
Wow, you make some great points there, and it's refreshing to hear their perspective that by talking more and using the terms more that we use to describe mental illnesses or mental health conditions, they become more familiar and less fear provoking by normalizing them, kind of. Thanks for sharing
even
that.
Scholars are doing this, where there's the field of CRIP studies. So they're taking the word CRIP from cripple and owning that word and saying, we're going to define it the way we want to define it, right? Or neurodiversity, or fat studies, or queer studies, taking the word queer that used to be used to demean and saying, no, we're going to define it the way we want to define it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Thank you. And Michelle, I would guess that this resonates with you. You have your wonderful mental health clothing brand, Schizophrenia.NYC, and I've read blog posts you've written about owning that term. And I'd like to turn to you now. How do you feel about that this notion that Richard is talking about in terms of owning the terms that describe our brain health status and abilities?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I've gotten some pushback before saying, why is it schizophrenic NYC? Why don't you use the word schizophrenia? And it's all about, this whole person first language debate. And I think that that's just a big waste of time, because there's a lot of homeless people all around the world, and a lot in New York City where I'm based, and they're freezing out in the cold right now, and they might be schizophrenic, and they don't care if you call them schizophrenic or a person with schizophrenia. They need help. So spending all of that money on all of these campaigns about person first language doesn't help the homeless person that's freezing to death. It just helps what people like in charge, because the person with the illness, they make the decision. You can go by person first language, you can go by identity first language. It really doesn't matter. What makes you comfortable. And I just wanted to bring up, you said you're probably big, like what is normal and define normal. I actually have a shirt and a whole sticker, define normal, because how do you define normal? It's what you think, it just works for you. Everybody is different. I always found if you meet somebody you think they're all normal, you get to know them, they're totally weird. And that's just how it goes.
I love that. And there's that great thank you for sharing that. It's great saying that love happens when you meet somebody and then your weirdness meshes with their weirdness or something like that. And
yeah, totally.
yeah, that's fantastic. And
I would just want to follow Michelle on that, because there's this great story about these Harvard University professors in the 1940s and 1950s who had a huge amount of money to define what the normal American is. And their entire sample of study subjects was the Harvard College freshman class. Right? So this is what became.
They're the normal freshmen. Right. Freshmen in college are normal. Okay.
Especially at Harvard.
Sure.
In the 1950s.
Sure. Yeah. I'll tell them about my freshman year of college. Define that. Sure. Okay.
Yeah. We had a term at Dartmouth called clueless shmen, like clueless freshmen. And that was something that was kind of circulated amongst the student body. And I kind of decided I would own that term after a while and just kind of roll with it. But yeah. Michelle, your story began, it's a fascinating story, with a misdiagnosis that ultimately led you on your own mission to change the dialogue. Can you tell us about that experience, and how did you first know that your diagnosis was a mistake, in a sense?
Well, yeah, at 18, and I brought myself to the therapist at school because I realized that something was up with me. And in about 15 minutes, they diagnosed me with bipolar. But I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't want to get anything other diagnosed because I was basically stigmatizing myself. So after college, I got diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I was like, at first I was like, oh God, I have schizophrenia. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? But then I went to dinner with my best friends from college. We lived together for like 4 years. And I go, all right, guys, I just want to let you know I have schizophrenia. And seriously, the conversation went, isn't that what you had the whole time? That could have not been more obvious. And yeah, we told you that. So if all of my best friends already knew and didn't care, why do I care about whatever like negative reactions people have, with me that aren't my friends? So it was just very accepting. And then I realized then that getting that schizophrenia diagnosis was the best thing that ever happened to me, because then I could be medicated and, treated for the right illness. So now I kind of live the best life that I possibly can, because now I have the right meds and diagnosis and everything. So yeah, being misdiagnosed sucked, but it led me in the direction of getting the correct diagnosis. That's just kind of how it goes. And people always say, how long does it take? How long does it take? It takes a long time. It does. It's a whole journey. It doesn't just happen overnight, because people say, oh, how do you adjust so well? Oh, my son, my daughter, they don't act like you. Yeah. Well, I didn't act like myself for a very long time. Yeah.
I get it. I've been there too. So yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I think that'll help our viewers put things in perspective. And Richard, you're talking a minute ago about the fluidity or spectrum to mental health. And can you elaborate a bit on what you mean when you say nobody's normal, and what, Michelle, maybe you can elaborate after Richard on what you mean by define normal a little more. But Richard, go first, please.
Well, sure. I think the word normal has been used to demean a lot of people. And the word is really just a variant of what we consider to be, the ideal. And, in the history of European and American thought, that ideal is somebody who's totally independent, autonomous, doesn't depend on anybody. And where people have been deemed abnormal is where they don't fit that ideal. But these ideals change over time. And so our notions of normal will also change over time. And all health, not just mental health, but all health is fluid. All health exists on a spectrum. All health is temporary. The majority of people in the world will meet the criteria for a mental illness at some point in their lives. And the idea of the spectrum is that we move along these spectrums. We're human beings. We change. We're moving targets. Now, I am a fairly anxious person, but I don't meet the criteria for an anxiety disorder. But I don't know that in the next 5 years or 5 months, I may move along the spectrum into a place at which that anxiety becomes debilitating to me. and hurts my work life or my social life. And at that point, that suffering then does warrant a diagnosis, because then that diagnosis drives the treatment. Everybody has headaches. Not everybody needs a brain scan. Everybody has heartburn. Not everyone needs to have an endoscopy and look for ulcers. So they might, but they don't always need that. And so a lot of these features, whether it's headaches or heartburn in physical illnesses, or even hearing voices, which many people do who don't meet the criteria for schizophrenia but still hear voices, is that we are all on a different set of spectrums. If we didn't have these things, we wouldn't be human. I mean, if I wasn't anxious, I would be killed today because I wouldn't look both ways before I crossed the street. I have to have anxiety. It's really a matter of degree.
Yeah, that does put things on a spectrum, like as you say. And Michelle, one of your clothing lines is called Define Normal, as you just showed us your sticker. What inspired you to start your design business, and how does your art help to reframe the conversation? How have you seen that actually change conversations around you?
I mean, why I started Schizophrenic.NYC, I wanted to make a change. I had a roommate that knew I was schizophrenic, and I was always just like talking to myself, and he would catch me a lot in these mannerisms that I was doing. And then one day I was taking the subway, it was pretty empty, and I looked down the train and I saw a homeless guy talking to himself in the exact same way that I talk to myself. And I was just kind of like taken aback, like, what if I didn't have my support team of my family, my friends, and my doctor? I could be homeless just like that guy is, because that's the only difference between me and him. And that's why I wanted to do something that would, make a difference, help out with the mentally ill community, and just be bold in statements and get people talking about mental health. Like, I've got the shirt on right now, don't be paranoid, you look great. I have the Define Normal shirt. I have a shirt that says like, I'm mentally ill and I don't kill. And it's all about just starting conversations. I have a pop-up shop in New York City where it's just a huge sign, Schizophrenic NYC, don't be paranoid, you look great. And people just walk by and they're like, what is this? And I'm like, we're talking about mental health. And then when I start saying like, I have schizophrenia, somebody tells me either they have a mental illness, a friend of theirs does, or a family member does. So the whole thing is, if it's so common, what is with all the stigma? It's because we don't talk about it. So my whole thing is, let's talk about it so there will be less stigma. More people need to talk about mental health because people just hush, 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 hush. No, let's talk about it. And when you wear a shirt like this, or especially the I'm mentally ill and I don't kill, that starts a conversation. The more conversations we have, the less stigma there's going to be. That is the mission. Let's talk about mental health.
Extraordinarily well said. And even though your shirt says I'm mentally ill and I don't kill, you are killing it out there. You are really making a difference for mental health and changing the conversation. Well done. I'm proud to know you. And the empathy that you foster amongst people is just so wonderful.
Thank you.
We're talking today about the language and culture of mental health and mental illness with two luminaries in the stigma reduction space. Michelle Hammer, who is a schizophrenia activist, artist, designer, and founder of the Schizophrenic.NYC mental health clothing brand, and Dr. Richard Grinker, professor of anthropology at George Washington University, who's also the author of Nobody's Normal, How Culture Created the Stigma of Mental Illness. Viewers, thank you for watching. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or comments you'd like to post, maybe experiences you'd like to share during our webcast today, anytime you want, just feel free to post them in the comments section today. And if you would like to share this webcast with anyone because you think it might benefit them to hear these words that we're sharing, please share the webcast with them. So Richard, your story too, and that of your family, has influenced your career path. Why was it so important to you to trace the roots of stigma and give people a better understanding of the role culture and language play when trying to understand brain health conditions like schizophrenia and autism?
My great-grandfather was a psychiatrist. My grandfather was a psychiatrist who was analyzed by Freud. My father was a psychiatrist, and my wife is a psychiatrist. And so all of these people, working in very different kinds of sociocultural environments, still said the same thing, which is that mental illnesses are double illnesses. There is the condition itself, and then there is society's moral judgment. And wouldn't it be great if when you were sick, you only had to worry about your sickness and not about what people thought about it? And one of the real luminaries in my life was my grandfather, because he ran psychiatric operations in North Africa. And he treated so many people who were suffering from all kinds of mental illnesses, some related to trauma, some not related to the trauma of the war. And he said very clearly, these are not abnormal people. These are normal people in abnormal circumstances. And he pushed the psychiatric profession to try to understand how our context, how our environment shapes the way in which we view mental illnesses. And if he were alive today, he would say, well, this is the silver lining of COVID, right? That when there is a global stressor, then some degree of emotional suffering is going to be expected and even reasonable. And I think that, today when people say I'm anxious or depressed or worse because of the pandemic, we don't necessarily look at that person and say, oh, well, you must be very weak. You must be very fragile. You must be, have bad genes or something. Rather, yeah, I get it. We're in this pandemic. We're all in this together. And when you have that kind of universalizing stressor, it tends to reduce stigma. The question is, can we keep it going? Or are we going to revert, back into a state in which people say, okay, the pandemic's over, so buck up and you shouldn't be suffering. Hopefully we won't get there.
When's the pandemic going to be over?
Well, that's a good question. I can always hope, I guess.
And going.
I know.
It's never ending. The anxiety is going to keep going because it's never going to end.
It's true. I mean, the other thing my grandfather did was he actually did a study of normal people in the early 1960s. Who
were these normal people now?
Yeah. What he did, I'll tell you, Michelle, what he did was he went to this male college, all men's college in Chicago, and he tested everybody for meeting the criteria for mental illnesses. And he pushed aside all the ones who tested positive for some mental illness. And he said, okay, let's look at the ones who don't meet the criteria for any mental illness. And he found they were boring, uncreative, and he actually said in 1962, when he published the article, he actually said, is this the cost of normality? It was in the Archives of General Psychiatry, 1962. The articles got the word homoclete in it because he tried to come up with a word that meant normal person that wasn't normal. And he basically said that where would we be if we were like these uncreative, unambitious, uninteresting normal people?
Could that be a new diagnosis? That would be pretty stigmatizing. Just call it boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think we want to go there.
You've been diagnosed with normal. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah. And it's a great conversation. And Richard, has your research helped you to understand your experience in your own family, like with your daughter? Has it helped you understand her experience better?
Well, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't even be doing research on mental illness. Despite my long family history, I wouldn't be doing it without my daughter, because my daughter was diagnosed with autism in 1994, just at the time when autism was becoming this much more popular diagnosis, and the criteria were broadening to include a wider array of the population. And I wanted to know not only what was autism, but why was it gaining traction? Why was this becoming a diagnosis that was used more and more? And I really link it to the decline of stigma, that we've been able to understand that we all exist on these spectrums. And my daughter's benefited so much from it, because when she was diagnosed, autism was not very well known, and people still occasionally blamed parents and bad mothers and bad fathers and bad genes. And due to advocacy and neurodiversity, we've come a long way, and it's helped my daughter tremendously, because when she does advocate for herself and tells people that she has autism, they understand what she means. Maybe not perfectly, maybe, not the way you and I might want, but they understand it as a non-stigmatized concept that they've learned, and especially young people, I think, are thinking this way.
That gives me a lot of hope. They
don't see her as weird or enigmatic or bizarre. They understand because they've got this framework of autism. which is why lots and lots of diagnoses, and maybe I'm here echoing something Michelle said earlier, can actually provide comfort because it provides a framework for you to understand what you're going through.
Yeah, I think that's part of the basis for the neurodiversity movement, identifying as part of your identity the characteristics of a diagnosis that you may have been given. But we love to talk more about that as well. Michelle, let's turn to you for a moment, please. You're featured in a WebMD video that explains through first-person accounts what it's like to have schizophrenia, and you create your own videos that are both serious and funny. What has the reaction response been to the publicity that you've done through these designs and videos?
I've gotten great responses. People like that I'm out there sharing my story, just talking about mental health. You know, there's always a troll sometimes, but people like that I'm out there sharing my story. I have that pop-up shop. Sometimes people come over and yell at me. Sometimes people come over and love me. You never know what it's going to be. It's New York City, but I get a lot of really good responses. I like it. You know, I share
That's
my
how it
artwork.
should be.
I share some artwork like this right here, all made from times of really great anxiety, turned into super cool stuff.
That is
Sell it
amazing.
along with the t-shirts.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle.
It all came from drawings like this. All
Wow.
started. Yep. Yep.
It's kind of
That's
like a
what I did when
Rorschach
I was
test.
anxious. Woo. Woo. Dude. I
Yeah.
started it. Yeah.
Is it kind of therapeutic for you to make those? Kind of settle your mind?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Helps with like all the anxiety and the loud voices. Just draw really, really intricate little drawings. And then I turned it into big things of artwork. You can see behind me, I have some canvases hanging up. I also sell big ones, and people are just loving what I'm doing, buying what I'm doing, and I'm loving it. And everyone's loving it, and it's all good. And we're having a good day.
You are owning it.
You know what I'm saying? I try to own it. I try my best, you know.
And helps people see the world as you see it.
Define normal. Yeah, people see the world as I see it. That's the whole thing.
That's fantastic. Awesome. And Richard, your book is uplifting and outlining how culture is changing and new narratives are emerging about mental health and mental illness, as we talked about, like during the pandemic, especially with the next generation, as you observe with your students. You say we're starting to value these neurological differences more than we value sameness, something we're kind of growing toward in our conversation here. How are we seeing this reflected in companies and employment practices today?
Well, people with disabilities in general, whether it's mental illnesses or physical disabilities, are unemployed or underemployed relative to the rest of the population. But we are seeing some positive signs. One of the great advantages or benefits of the neurodiversity movement was to push employers to develop autism hiring programs, where employers are seeking to hire people that have skills that they haven't been able to find, certain systematizing skills, looking at computer codes and so on. Some people with autism like to do certain kinds of work that others detest. And sometimes they're better at certain things than others. So I tell the story in the book of the Israeli military that is giving the young people the possibility to do their mandatory military service, though they have a disability like autism, which is really an important rite of passage socially for a young person in Israel. I profile JP Morgan Chase and their autism program, where they've hired many workers. And I tell also the story of a cybersecurity company in Australia, where the increased openness and discussion about a whole host of physical and mental issues is attributed to their autism hiring program. So I'll just give you a quick story here. Michael Fieldhouse, who's an executive at this cybersecurity company, was in his office one day, and a woman came to him and said, Michael, I want to let you know, I don't think I'm really working up to my standard. I've been having a lot of symptoms associated with menopause, and I'm not, really feeling myself. And he looked at me as I was interviewing him pre-pandemic in person, and he said, this wouldn't have happened without the autism program. Here's a woman who is coming to talk to me about a condition that most women are not going to talk to a male employer about. A woman in business, identifying herself also in terms of her age. But the autism hiring program was like a tide that raised all boats, where people said, well, if they're open to talking about autism, they must be open to talking about this and this and this. And so you see one niche area kind of generalizing to others.
That is beautiful. By starting to share openly about a certain health condition, we can open up conversations for other health conditions and open those gates of empathy amongst employers and employees and just people in society, like Michelle is modeling with her clothing line, the people she meets in New York City. This is great to hear.
Well, this is getting back to what Michelle said about conversation, disclosure, and openness, and talking about it. In fact, I end the book in a strange way with because you wouldn't think of that this story would be in a book on mental illness stigma, but I end the book with the story of Hester Prynne from the Scarlet Letter, who wore the letter A for adultery, and she comes back after being exiled for many, many years, and she's still wearing the A. And people say, oh, you could take that off. We don't have to talk about that. That's over. That was a long time ago. And she says, no, I'm going to keep it on because it's become a sign for me of my strength and endurance. And when she owned that, when she advocated for herself by saying, no, I'm going to keep this A on my breast, people started to see her as strong, as someone who had endurance, as someone who was brave. They saw her in the way that she described herself. And Hawthorne even uses the word in 1850 that the letter A ceased to be a stigma. Wow.
That's such a great example. And it's such a powerful story to communicate this thought, this idea. Thanks for bringing that up. And we've talked a lot about ways that are empowering and kind of owning our conditions, that ways to talk about mental health that help us own our conditions and that are empowering. But are there any, playing devil's advocate, is there any way to refer to mental health or mental illness that you would say would be not good, inadvisable, or possibly hurtful? Maybe it depends on the context. Or what are your thoughts?
Are you asking me or Michelle?
Either of you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Michelle, you go first.
I've walked down the street and I've heard like, oh, this schizophrenic weather. Like, what does that even mean? Schizophrenic weather? What is the weather like? Hearing voices? If you're going to make fun of the weather, say that it's bipolar. That would make more sense. If you're going to be ignorant, say the right illness. Like, come on now. Just saying.
Yeah. People should at least know what they're talking about.
At least insult in the right way. If you're going to insult,
Okay.
say the right one. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thanks. Richard, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, one of the things that has bothered me over the course of my research is the effort of so many experts to try and frame mental illnesses as brain disorders, which is, situating the condition and the experience in the individual. And there is no evidence that I'm aware of that reframing mental illnesses in terms of the brain, seeing mental illnesses as neurobiological in the individual's physiology, has helped decrease stigma. It has helped research, and it has helped scientists to generate all kinds of data that may be one day, revolutionary, but it doesn't necessarily reduce stigma, because stigma isn't in our nature and it's not in our brains. Stigma is from our culture and from our society. That's actually empowering because we can change our culture. When somebody has a mental illness, they don't just have something called depression or schizophrenia. They also live in a world with loved ones and family and friends and a work life and neighbors, and they live in a particular environment and they have a certain socioeconomic status or religion. And you will never see any of that stuff, which is so crucial to human experience, in a microscope.
Very well said. Yeah.
I've heard about those disorders. Sometimes they want to put it as disorders about like prisoners. They're thinking, don't put them in jail. They have a brain disorder, put them in a psychiatric ward. That's why I've heard people want to put like schizophrenia as a brain disorder. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I've heard that. I believe that is one of the platform priorities of another mental health organization, Schizophrenia Psychosis Action Alliance, which
Yeah.
I can see some potential benefit there in terms of like unlocking insurance coverage potentially, or reframing it to make it seem like it's not as, I mean, I guess the theory might be that people don't see it as a character flaw that way. But Richard, you might have some controversy around that. What do you think, Richard?
Well, the research throughout the world on reframing mental illnesses as brain disorders suggests that when it is done so, the individual becomes seen as damaged or as lacking self-control. And that's where the stigma of mental illness came from in the first place. You know, de Tocqueville, way back in Democracy in America, said that Americans' ideal was the individual, the autonomous individual, dependent on no one, accountable to themselves, and totally autonomous. And, you know, and that's a very American ideal. But you look at other places in the world and you see that when society takes responsibility, or when society takes the blame, like saying it was war or COVID that caused something, then you see a decrease in stigma. And I tell the story of a hunter-gatherer named Tomzo in Namibia, living in the desert, hunter-gatherer, and he hears very disturbing and angry voices when he's not taking his medicine. But the medicines keep those at bay. He gets the medicines from a European clinic, and they are afraid of him. And they have him listed on their books as having schizophrenia. And he goes and gets his medicines. But 12 miles away in his village, they don't even see him as someone with a disease as long as he's comfortable and not hearing these voices. Furthermore, they don't see the disease as something inside him, but rather something that settled in him randomly from some spirit, some malevolent spirit. He's not to blame, in other words. And they care for him. And so you have two very different ways of looking at a person's suffering just 12 miles apart. In one, it's biomedical and schizophrenia and involves fear. In the other one, it's not even a disease if the voices are not there, and he's cared for and seen as somebody who's an innocent victim.
How do you think America sees schizophrenia?
Well, you know, there's a lot of variation in the presentation, right, of people with schizophrenia, as you just, you know, indicated. And you've indicated also on, you know, some of the recordings, you know, like the saying around autism, you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism, and it's the same with schizophrenia. But I think that the conditions that have been stigmatized the most in Europe and North America are those that evoke a loss of self-control, because that's what Europeans and Americans value so much, that independent self-control. So substance abuse is and schizophrenia, and also outside of mental illness, obesity. These are addictions. These are more stigmatized because they conflict with that American ideal of independence, autonomy, and self-control.
Fascinating. I never really thought about the basis for why schizophrenia seems more stigmatized than other mental health conditions, but that the way you phrase it kind of is good, articulates in a way that makes you see it better.
The media, you know, if you're turning on like the 11 o'clock news and there's something about a person with schizophrenia, it's that they attacked an innocent person or people. But if you turn on the 11 o'clock news, you're never going to hear about that person with schizophrenia that woke up in the morning, had breakfast, went to work, after work, went out with friends, got home, had dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed, because crisis and mental illness is public, while wellness and mental illness is private. What makes the news? The danger, not the wellness.
That's an amazing point.
All the time.
Yeah.
Thanks for making that point too. The media tends to blow up things, whatever sensationalistic, and it gives us a skewed view of how things really are, including how people are.
Exactly.
Good point. And that's why speaking out like you do, like we're doing today, is so important to and we can share this with people and help them understand better. So as the final question in our interviews, well, before we get to the lightning round, give that a spoiler alert. Final question, what more can we do as a society to eradicate stigma, or at least to erode the discrimination that people with mental illness experience due to what their diagnosis might be? Michelle first and then Richard.
Educate yourself. Just educate yourself on what mental illness is really like. Go on YouTube, watch people's videos, firsthand accounts. There's a lot of people out there now. Even on TikTok, there's tons of creators with all kinds of mental illness talking about it. And just educate yourself and learn. That's what you got to do, in my opinion.
All right. Richard, what do you think?
Well, I want to give a shout out to Advocacy again. Some people need help advocating. Some people can advocate all by themselves, but advocacy is important. And I'm thinking about some of the remarkable students that I've had. The student with Tourette syndrome who stood up in front of a class of 300 students at the beginning of the semester and said, I just want you all to know that I may say some things or blurt out some things that might surprise you. I have Tourette syndrome. Or the person who comes up to the professor and says, I might not seem to be paying attention. I have autism, but I am paying attention. I just have, different eye gaze. These advocates are really tremendous because they completely take away any kind of reaction to them that would be one of fear or confusion. They don't say, what's up with this person? They know what's up with this person now because that person said by themselves, I have Tourette's. So now they understand it and they expect it. I don't think everybody's as good at advocacy as that young man, but I wish there were more. And I know that I've been a good advocate for my daughter, but I also know that I'm comfortable speaking in large groups, and I'm a certain socioeconomic status, and I'm white, and I have other privileges that make it easier for me to advocate. Somebody for whom the English isn't the first language, somebody who has recently immigrated to the United States, perhaps, maybe they don't have those same advocacy skills. We really need to put a lot of effort into that.
That's so well said. We can hope more people can find the support and the courage that they can use to be that change they want to see in the world, as Gandhi had said in his famous quote. So this brings us to the lightning round. Are you ready for a few quick questions and quick answers as we go through our final stage? We'll start with Richard first and circle around for Michelle's answers, one person at a time. Richard, are you ready?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. What helps you cope when you're going through a tough time mentally?
What helps me the most is understanding that being dependent on others is actually the essence of being human, that we're social beings, and that I shouldn't be ashamed or embarrassed that I might depend on someone else. That's what it means to be human.
You bet. Stronger together. What is one thing you'd like to see changed in terms of the way people think and talk about mental health and mental illness?
I would like people to be able to talk about the way in which culture shapes the way in which we manage all differences, whether they're sexual or ethnic or mental, cognitive, whatever it might be, and that because culture shapes our reaction, we actually have the power to change it. It is within our power to change these things. And we need to realize that stigma is not in our nature. It's in our culture. It's something we learn from our culture, and we can change what we teach.
Fantastic takeaway. Thank you. What are you grateful for this holiday season?
Holiday season, that's a pretty easy one. Rituals. My daughter Isabel, I'm not a ritual person. I don't do a lot of rituals, but my daughter Isabel, who's autistic, loves rituals. I think it's sort of her way of kind of reaffirming the social relationships and the social networks around her. I would never do rituals without her. That's what I'm thankful for in a holiday season, that she brings us all together, and we then sort of understand how she's been able to build and is still building a meaningful life. And I guess that's what rituals do, right? They remind us of who we are and where we're headed.
Absolutely. Extremely well said. Thank you. And what gives you hope?
My students give me hope. When I hear a student tell me that getting diagnosed with ADHD in her freshman year was the best day of her freshman year, that gives me hope. Gives me a lot of hope, because these people at this age, I don't want to sound trite, children are our future and so on, but they are remarkable. My students are remarkable in their in how they contrast their own views on mental illness and mental health care with those of their parents.
That's something we can learn from. Thank you. Michelle, it's your turn. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right, let's do this. What helps you cope when you're going through a tough time mentally?
I just draw and draw and draw and draw and draw until I can't draw anymore.
Okay, and the drawings are amazing, as you've shown us.
Thank you.
Great. What is one thing you'd like to see change in terms of the way people think and talk about mental health and mental illness?
I think people should not be whispering and quiet about it. Like, oh, that person's got a mental illness. Like, just speak loud, be open and honest, no hush hush, just talk about it.
Excellent. I was thinking about Mental Health America's slogan, fight in the open, as Clifford W. Beer said so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great one. What are you grateful for this holiday season?
The family and friends who support me.
Absolutely. And what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is seeing all the younger generations talking about mental health, being more open and accepting everybody around them.
Fantastic. Your work is helping that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Richard, for sharing with us your wisdom and your insights today. Absolutely. And viewers, thank you too. Before we leave you, we'd like to share with you our One Mind Cyber Guide team's review of their mental health app pick of the week. Take it away, Cyber Guide team.
Hi, my name is Steven Schuler, and I'm the Executive Director of One Mind Cyber Guide. You probably already use your phone for many things throughout the day, but did you know that there are also apps to help you manage your mental health and well-being? There are literally thousands of mental health apps available for download today, and with so many choices to choose from, it can be hard to separate the good from the bad. That's where One Mind Cyber Guide can help. At One Mind Cyber Guide, we review apps on 3 different metrics: credibility, user experience, and transparency. We've reviewed over 200 products, and all of these reviews are available for free on our app guide at onemindcyberguide.org. If you're interested in using a mental health app and you already see a therapist, try working with them to find an app to integrate into your treatment. They may have their own recommendations for apps or may suggest ways to use an app to add on to the work you're doing in therapy. In the age of technology, it's still as important as ever to build connections and a community of support for mental health. Why not use apps as a starting point for conversations around mental health, just as you might suggest a helpful app to a friend who needs help with their time management, fitness tracking, or navigation? The more we normalize these conversations, the better chance we have of decreasing mental health stigma.
Liberate is a meditation app made by and for the Black community. When you first use the app, you can customize your journey based on your level of experience with meditation and topics you're interested in. The app will then suggest meditations to match these preferences. There are a range of meditation topics to explore, including sleep, self-worth, grief, microaggressions, and more. You can like your favorite meditations, which will appear in the favorite section. Upgrading to Liberate Plus will give you access to additional meditations and curated content, and you will also be able to download meditations to listen to offline. Though anyone could use this app, its aim is to create a safe space for the Black community and to develop a daily meditation practice.
We've reviewed Liberate Meditation at One Mind Cyber Guide. It scores 2 out of 5 on our credibility scale and 3.2 out of 5 on our user experience scale. You can learn more about Liberate Meditation on our app guide at cyber.guide/liberate.
Thank you, Cyber Guide team. And thanks as well to you, Michelle, and you, Richard Grinker, Michelle Hammer and Richard Grinker, for sharing with us what you did today. And viewers, thank you for watching and participating. Feel free, please, to check out onemind.org/brainwaves for all of our past episodes, where you can also sign up for our e-newsletter to be alerted of future Brainwaves episodes and other One Mind activities. Everyone, thanks for watching. Happy holidays, and we'll see you next time.
Mental health is stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight.
I think I need help.
Can you talk?
Struggling.
I'm here.
Depressed. Can't sleep.
But we need the science and solutions to change lives. Now, more than ever, we are in this fight together. We are of one mind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.